Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are. My name is Edward Jie. I'm with Gao Feng Advisory Company. We are a management and strategy consulting firm with roots in China. Today is April 7th, 2022, and I'm very delighted to have a good friend of mine, somebody that I know for a little while now, and I really appreciated, his knowledge and expertise with regard to China. His name is Mark Sharp. Okay, so Mark is managing partner for King and Wood Medicine, which is a legal firm with offices in Shanghai, London, Frankfurt, and other places in the world. Mark's specialty is on China, and he has been working in China for over several decades, as I understand, and very much focused on helping foreign companies to really understand the context of China, especially with respect to foreign direct investment in the acquisitions, M&As, and also issues that's related to intellectual property protection. So recently, Mark and I have been talking about and also actually trying to help some of our clients to address some of the issues related to how tech companies should think about issues related to China, especially intellectual property. But before we get into having a dialogue on those kind of issues, perhaps Mark, you can talk more about your own background, and so that our audience will get to know you even more.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Edward. Yeah, so I was living in Shanghai full time from 1993 until 2018, and then I moved to London, and I was going back and forth until the pandemic interrupted things. And at the moment, I'm sitting back in Shanghai on the 25th day of some kind of quarantine lockdown. So it started as quarantine, and now I've morphed into lockdown. So I've had a lot of time to do thinking and self-reflection. So very happy to have a dialogue with you today.
Yeah, Mark, you come with a very distinguished track record, since you've been working in China for such a long time, and you know China really well. But at the same time, you also work, across border. I think today your normal domicile is in London, right? But you work still very closely with your colleagues in Shanghai. So that's very unique, because that sort of linkage, it's actually, in my view, is what we need today, is to have this linkage between China and the rest of the world, in particular with the West, and so that you can have more communications, proper dialogues between China and the rest of the world. And I think, Mark, you would play a pivotal role in this kind of communications. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, let's hope so. I think there's definitely room to improve dialogue between the West and China at the moment. And so maybe business can play an important role in facilitating that kind of dialogue.
Yeah, certainly. I think especially in the tech area, right? This tech sector is an area that a lot of investors, a lot of customers are very interested in, mainly because China, over the last several decades, has really evolved into a very active tech space, a lot of very successful tech companies. And at the same time, many foreign companies or multinational companies who are in the tech space have also gone into China or very interested in doubling up in the China market. But they also have concerns, right? So in your dealings with your tech company clients, what are their concerns or the interest areas with respect to China?
So I think the first one, like you mentioned at the start, is still intellectual property. A lot of tech companies, by their very nature, they have, that's their defining feature, is their technology, and how can they protect the IP in it. Very briefly, I just think before someone looks at the China market, they should look at their catalog of IP and make sure that anything that you've registered overseas is also registered here. So that would mean obvious things like trademarks, patents, but also for a lot of the clients we're dealing with now, software is a very crucial part of the digital space. And so copyright software, which doesn't mean you have to disclose your source code or anything, but it does help and it is inexpensive. So I think the IP system is not perfect here in China, but it's improved a lot. And if I can just, a very brief story on that would be, within our law firm, we've got something like 5,000 lawyers in China. The busiest and most dynamically growing part of our practice is IP litigation. And the IP litigation is mostly Chinese companies suing other Chinese companies. So I think that shows you that IP rights are increasingly, protected here. And, Chinese companies also, take litigation forward. So that probably was something different 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But now I think, it's important before you get here, protect your rights, have a strategy as well. I'm sure you and your colleagues would also help people in the strategy about protecting IP, not just on paper, but, really the systems, but not be overly worried because, China's a dynamic place, maybe not right at the moment, but normally it's very dynamic and people will go all around the world and you can't hide from China. If you've got a product and somebody thinks they can perhaps, be inspired by your product, they'll track you down and they'll start replicating it. So these are some of the issues to consider on IP.
Yeah, many of the foreign companies or clients of us are still very concerned about IP because they've heard horror stories over the years. And as you said, the situation on the ground here in China actually has been improving. Have you seen cases where foreign companies sued Chinese company for IP infringement, and in fact they won the cases?
Yeah, so I think that there's many cases where they win. So I don't think that's the issue. I think, if we're talking about the big tech companies now, it's different. So when people think about IP breaches, I think most of the things that people are thinking about are things like, DVD copies or, fake fashion goods or things like that. And that probably was, a lot of people would address that through administrative processes, which doesn't result in very large fines. I think what we're talking about today more as the tech companies is it's other companies who might be stealing your technology. And I think in those cases, the foreign companies have won these cases and the amount of damages are increasing now. So I think the main problem has been in China, especially in places where they have those special IP courts like Shanghai or Shenzhen, it's really unlikely that there's a very strong bias against a foreign company. I don't think that's really the case. I think, the main issue was that the international company hadn't really protected their rights. They hadn't really made out their case very strongly. And then secondly, the problem was the amount of damages awarded were relatively minor. But that's the thing which is in China anyway. Chinese judges are not like American judges. They're very conservative in awarding damages. But, for IP holders, it's improving and the amount of damages is, being awarded is getting, more serious now.
Yeah, you talk about the judiciary process here in China, right? Many of my foreign clients are very concerned about whether or not that process is just, is fair, and is transparent. What is your observations on the evolution of that process over the years?
So I think it's best to talk about personal experiences because it's a big place. So I think what I've found is over the years, if I'm talking to a client, many people prefer arbitration for some agreements. I actually have a preference, depending on the circumstances, maybe for Chinese courts, because in a tech setting, Chinese courts are quicker. They've got more, weapons in their armory. It's more direct, and the enforcement is, easier, and the expense is, lower. So, so I actually, that's obviously if there's a contractual dispute. If a Chinese company, without any contractual dispute, is just infringing your IP, you'll have to go to a court because, there's no agreement specifying arbitration. So I would say my experience has been that, the most difficult company to go against is a private entrepreneurial company in a second or third tier city. I think they often have strong relationships with the courts, but I don't think necessarily there's any, untoward things happening, but there is, local protectionism. I think the other extreme would be a large state-owned company in Shanghai, or a listed company in Shanghai or Beijing or Shenzhen or one of the, tier one cities. There, I think, the courts will be transparent and, it's different. So I think the bigger the city and, what kind of party you're going against, that will make the experience very different when it comes to the court. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah.
I understand also it's also difficult to grapple with because, you might choose who you have a technology license agreement with, but you don't choose who pirates your license. So I think, the other thing is people have to look at it. We've got one client who's, program, they sell software licenses and, they get hacked, these kind of programs, and they get put on Taobao and people can buy it for like, 20 RMB instead of 2,000 RMB. But, Taobao has also improved now. So if we send Taobao a letter, they'll immediately close down those vendors. So I think, you have to be up to date. You can't always just spend lots of money on a law firm doing a big court case. You have to also look at other ways. Every kind of issue, look for the strategic, clever, bespoke solution rather than just the normal kind of process.
Yeah, that's very good advice, Mark. As you know, many foreign companies, either in the tech sector or quote unquote non-tech sector as well, they are building up their local R&D capabilities on the ground in China, right? Because they see the need to do so because of the vast and quickly developing market demand patterns here in China. But then at the same time, when companies come to set up their local R&D facilities, the headquarters are usually very concerned. Can we do this right? Will our IP be stolen by someone else? How should we organize our local R&D function and so on? So in this kind of situation, how would you advise companies who are thinking about locating or doubling up their local R&D function from the standpoint of sort of legal advice?
Yeah, so like from purely legal type of stuff, I think, again, it's a bit like thinking about the circumstances and, let's say if it's an American company, they couldn't necessarily just adopt the American approach, which I don't actually know what the American approach would be. But, the IP system in China is a bit different in some regards. And in some ways, it's similar to the German approach. So if you've got an R&D center, one thing would be that in Chinese law, the inventor has certain commercial rights. These can be guided by an agreement, but if you don't have an agreement, you do put yourself up to a much wider exposure, if somebody invents a very valuable innovation. So that's one issue. The other main one, I think, which is important, is if you invent something in China which is patentable, patents have to be patented in each geography. So you don't have such a thing like a worldwide patent. So the law in China is if it's invented in China, you have to first patent it in China. You can patent it subsequently wherever you want, but if you don't patent it first in China, then that patent will be likely found invalid if somebody thinks of that. So let's say if it's an American company, they register the patent which was clearly, invented in Shanghai in the US, then if some Chinese competitor finds it, they could invalidate the subsequent Chinese patent. So I think that's the main thing. And then I think when you look at what the risks are, in an R&D, it's less likely that it's espionage, I would guess. Probably the biggest single problem we've seen over the years is employees, either, disgruntled employees or not even disgruntled employees who just move for a bigger, pay increase or, who are entrepreneurial and then move and want to set up a similar type of company. So I think with those kind of employees, contracts are useful. They're not always a silver bullet, but I wouldn't rely just on an employment contract. I always tell clients, have a separate, I call it a proprietorship agreement and confidentiality agreement. And this would just kind of, firstly, move it away from labor arbitration because they have no teeth and they're very pro-employee, to local courts where you can get injunctions, where you can directly attack people, where you can also say that if the person leaves, that they agree that this agreement can be disclosed to their new employer, and things like that. And also very critical is that you establish that they don't have any relevant inventions going in, because they might leave and they might say, well, I've been working on this for 10 years before I joined the company, so it's actually my creation. So I think that they're the kind of things to look at from a legal perspective. Obviously, I think you and your colleagues or other kind of consulting firms might have ideas about how to address security or these other kind of issues.
Right. And this issue with employees, or disgruntled employees, really is not a China-specific problem, right? It happens over the world, everywhere. I guess that could happen too, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, well, I mean, my experience is almost exclusively China. I think probably, I think one of the reasons why it's different. We've had some very exciting cases. Perhaps the most exciting case was actually a foreigner working for a European company, and this foreign person, the client, ended up having. Excuse me, I'll start again. We had a foreigner working in China, and this guy was going to get paid a lot of money by a Chinese company, and a detective followed him across the country, going to different places. And when the foreign person returned to Europe, they arrested him for this kind of stuff. So I think, the difference in China and elsewhere is perhaps because it's still rapidly developing and there's a lot of money to be made in tech, probably in, a more developed market, it's not as easy to go off and then suddenly start a unicorn. Yeah, it could happen in America, UK, and Europe, but probably in China, it just happens more quickly, and there's more scope for people to make these kind of dynamic shifts. At least that's what I think we've seen.
If we move beyond sort of IP protection, R&D, innovation, and so on, as you work with a large range of tech companies or foreign tech companies in China, what are the things that you see they're interested in? What are they doing actually?
What are they doing? So I think, I think if something's, except for maybe social media, if something is successful overseas, there's room for it here. So, things that we've seen, there's a lot of digital solutions. There's a lot of software companies, a lot of value-added telco companies. So I think if there was one area in particular, it's probably less hardware, more kind of software. And I think a lot of what we see is probably more in the healthcare area or mobility, probably not as much consumer stuff, but that might be just us, I don't know. But I think somehow the consumer not as prevalent as you would expect. So it's much more health, and mobility, like cars, autonomous cars, that kind of stuff seems to be where we see a lot of interest.
Some people were commenting that in the tech sector, the Chinese government has been blocking foreign tech companies, in particular US tech companies, from coming to China. Do you see that as a general phenomenon?
I don't think so. I mean, unless it's the social media stuff. But I think, like Google and those companies, I think the Chinese don't block them coming in. These tech companies are not willing to abide by the Chinese regulations. So I think that's one issue. I don't think I don't know why the Chinese would block tech companies coming here. They would like the tech to come here. And, it's better than buying the tech, as if the foreigners come in, they set up the tech themselves. So I think, China's a big buyer of tech. It's probably number 3 or 4 in the world, in purchasing foreign technology. So, there's no fear of foreign technology, I don't think. I think, there might be things like if you're in, we've got a client that does a remote computer type software thing, they would have to undergo a security assessment if they had very large state-owned enterprises or banks as their clients. But I think these are normal kind of requirements. I don't think anybody blocks foreign tech companies coming to China. They may have to undergo security assessments, or there may be some very narrow areas which they can't service. but I think China's pretty open to foreign technology.
Yeah, that's the same experience when we deal with our clients as well. And Mark, you're very unique because you've been in China for a long time, and you build a very thriving business on the ground here in China. But you also, you come from the West, and so you've been in China for such a long time. You witnessed a lot about what happened in China over this time, and everybody was talking about the changes that China has witnessed, and so on and so forth. So if you try to recollect your entire experience here in China, what are the one or two things that you can share with our clients about your observation, your experience about working here in China?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is when I first got to China, that was back in '93. There was so fewer foreign companies here, and we would get excited if we had a rep office, to establish a rep office. And establishing a rep office was like as difficult as doing a big joint venture nowadays. The paperwork, it was very difficult. So I think that's a big change. Now foreign companies are really part of the Chinese ecosystem. I think we're seeing the new kind of area where people are going to have to localize management, but headquarters still wishes to retain a certain level of control. So I'm sure your clients are reaching out to you about that kind of thing. And I think the other thing which was different was, I think Chinese people have always been proud of the culture and everything, and their whole sense of it. But that's become more pronounced. It would have been 20 or 30 years ago, if you said, "Oh, I need some surgery," people would say, "Oh, you've got to go to the West, or you can get out or something." But nowadays, I think most Chinese people say, "Oh, you should do surgery in China," or Chinese mobile phones are better than an Apple mobile phone, or there's this new, it's interesting how Chinese people now really value Chinese products, and I think that's a big change. And so, I think also the whole economy has changed so much that it used to be like a one-way street of foreign investment and foreign technology coming into China, but now it's become a bit of a super highway that is in both directions. Maybe the last 2 years haven't been great for it, but like until COVID hit, we really saw a lot of Chinese companies going out. We saw foreign companies coming in, and also technology. So China's become an innovator of technology as well. So it's interesting. I think for some of the foreign technology companies, I tell them, one of the biggest challenges they have is they're so slow moving. Like, it's funny, tech companies you think are quick, dynamic, but they're busy with their own stuff in their core markets, and they know China's important, but they think it's big, and I don't know how to deal with it, and it's complicated. It's a long trip, and I've got to get my next, series of technology upgrades done, and they don't have time for it. And so I've talked to people, maybe you need to find the right kind of Chinese partner, and those guys also didn't really exist 30 years ago either. So 30 years ago, doing a joint venture with a Chinese partner, was so difficult. It was such a different set of understanding. And nowadays, people met more in the middle. I think, the Chinese companies we come across, I don't want to say that the other ones were unprofessional, but they're professional. They understand things. It's easier. It's still tough to perhaps deal with people always. But I think for these foreign tech companies, they can perhaps do something in China and let the Chinese, have a bit more say in it. And they might learn something for their home market as well, because China does come up with interesting innovations. And, I think for some of them, if you really want to be big in China, it's not that the government says that you'll need a joint venture partner. You probably need a joint venture partner just to achieve the scale. I think that's probably, the issue.
That's very consistent with our observation and our experience helping clients. Actually, before that, I also came to Shanghai or China quite a bit from Hong Kong, but in terms of as a professional, 1993 also was when I joined the Boston Consulting Group, and we started the BCG office in Shanghai. So I was managing the office by that time. So essentially, I think we arrived in Shanghai around the same time. I think over the years we probably witnessed very similar things. So I've taken a lot of your time, Mark, this afternoon. So thank you very much for your time. But before we go, perhaps if you don't mind, I ask one last question to you, Mark. Your firm, King and Wood Mallison, is a very unique legal firm or a law firm because you actually started in China, in Shanghai, but you became international, right? It's sort of the reverse, right, compared to many other so-called international law firm. And can you tell us a little bit more about your presence in China today? You mentioned about your headcount roughly, but tell us more about what you're doing, what kind of clients you have. If people want to get hold of you or your colleagues, how should they do that?
Yeah, sure. So the law firm King and Wood Mallisons, so King and Wood is a Chinese law firm that started in 1993 in Beijing, in a hotel, in the Kunlun Hotel, and started with just 4 people, and it grew, and we've never grown in China by we never merged other law firms, so it's really just been lateral people and mostly organic growth. And so the law firm now has, I think, 13 offices in China, with about 400 partners and maybe 5,000 employees in China. And so we're a big full-service law firm. It's also interesting, I joined King & Wood as the first foreign person to join King & Wood back in 2000. And so when I joined, we only had 17 partners and 90 people. So I've been lucky enough to witness the growth. And back then when I first joined, probably the amount of revenue was 50-50 between foreign clients and Chinese clients. Today, probably Chinese clients are 95% of our revenue.
Wow.
Now, obviously, our revenue is much, much bigger. But we do a lot of securities work. We do a lot of litigation. We do a lot of corporate. We do M&A. So we're a full-service big law firm, but we're centrally managed. So it's not like a franchise. So we do have a more teamwork approach. And then just quickly, the Mallisons part of our name is an Australian law firm that's probably like 220 years old or something. So it's a very old law firm. And we joined up with them 2008. And, so we have a Swiss Verein structure. So where, the law firms have the same brand, and we have, coordination on a global level. And then for you, it might be also interesting to know, our joint venture in Hong Kong is a law firm that China and the Australians share. It's, I think, now the biggest law firm in Hong Kong. So, so we're strong in, China, we're strong in Hong Kong, we're strong in Australia, and we also have, offices in North America and in Europe. But those offices, they're not, they're not the same caliber as the, Asian offices. So we think we're an Asian global law firm, which is a bit different. So I think we're the largest law firm in the world that is not from the US or from the UK.
Wow, that's impressive, Mark. How could people get hold of you guys if they want to?
Well, I think the easiest way is just Google or Baidu or whatever, my name and KWM, and I think you'll find me immediately. So that's probably the easiest way.
Oh, fantastic, Mark. Yeah, I won't.
I'm sure.
I won't hold. Sorry.
I'm sure if they contact you, you'll be happy to, refer them to me.
Of course. Yeah, we had a good time working together. So yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you for your time and also for your insights about China and also IP work and IP protection and tech companies and so on. So really appreciate your insights and your time.
Thanks a lot, Edward. Thank you.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.